This report from the Xerox Rochester International Jazz Festival is being brought to you in part by our members and by the Hilton Garden Inn, Rochester downtown. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Rob Linton. Welcome to day number 5 of this festival, and we immediately go to Derrick Lucas, who is a very special guest in our booth tonight. Derrick, who do you have?
Yes, we do. We'll be performing at the Temple Theater in just a few minutes. Mr. Chris Brubeck. Chris, welcome back to Rochester.
Hey, it's my pleasure to be here again.
And the name of the new album is called Timeline.
Yeah.
Congratulations on the album. And for you, what does this project mean, Timeline?
Well, our dad, Dave Brubeck, in 1958, did a massive State Department tour, doing about 90 gigs in 100 days, representing the United States government, because at that point in the Eisenhower administration, they figured out that the secret weapon the United States had post-World War II was jazz.
Jazz.
So you listeners, you should be proud of the secret weapon status that you've inherited.
Right.
Between Nixon and Eisenhower, they devised that jazz would be the secret weapon.
Right. So my dad's group, the Dave Brubeck Quartet, was on the front line, and that was 60 years ago, since we're in 2018. So that was the theme of this record, that the Brubeck Brothers Quartet, which includes my brother Dan on drums, Mike D'Amico on guitar, and Chuck Lime on piano. And we did tunes that were either written on that tour or inspired by that tour. And maybe the most famous tune that came out of that tour was when my dad heard street musicians in Istanbul playing a wild rhythm in 9, which was the inspiration for Blue Rondo a la Turk,
Yes.
which actually was a major roadway in jazz, sort of a little world music thing that opened up everyone's ears.
Speaking to Chris Brubeck here on Jazz 90.1. So how old were you when your dad went on that tour?
I was, I was 6 years old.
All right.
And my 2 older brothers got to go for part of the tour.
That's what.
And I was like really sad and like hurt, like, how come Big Brother gets to go, that kind of thing. But then when they went to the dangerous part of the tour, which was Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, as my dad used to joke, places that used to be dangerous.
Right.
They even said no women and children for this.
Right.
Only the veteran jazz musicians were expendable at that point.
Speaking to Chris Brubeck here on Jazz 90.1. So what's it like to play your dad's music in terms of this concept? Because that was a majorly historic event, what happened 60 years ago. So no one even thought of actually sending jazz around the globe as a way of being kind of a peacekeeping thing, as well as introducing American culture to folks. I can't imagine now, 60 years later, the world that we live in now, you're doing this again.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's great for Dan and I. We played with Dave so many years, when he was alive. And so it was kind of rough at first after he passed away to be playing his music. But then on the other hand, there's no better way to honor his legacy than to keep playing his music. And I know we've touched so many lives over so many decades. And now, as his generation is all passing away, we're getting to the point, it's like, my parents took me to see you guys when you were in college and I was in college. And now I'm bringing my kids to see you so they know what the Brubeck thing is all about.
As we're getting closer to your father's centennial, which is in 2 years, what do you think his legacy is? And as a son and also as a musician.
Well, it's really kind of multi-pronged. I mean, from a strict musical viewpoint, I would say it's odd time signatures. A lot of people still don't know how much classical music he wrote. I mean, over 18 major cantatas, about hour-long pieces with chorus and orchestra, ballet scores, all kinds of things like that. And then that whole tour inspired another direction that was important in his career, is because Louis Armstrong was doing those tours. And my dad and my mom were saying, like, man, what's wrong with this picture? They go out for the United States government to tell everyone how great democracy is, and they hear the freedom of democracy in the way jazz is played, and he comes back and he can't stay in the same hotel. Man, that's screwed up.
Oh, yeah.
So they wrote a musical called The Real Ambassadors.
That's right.
And that was all about what would happen if Louis Armstrong was king for a day, or made all the rules, and the summit session was a jazz session, and all this kind of concept. It was Louis and Carmen McRae, and it only got performed once live, with that cast, which is at the Monterey Jazz Festival. It's a very famous thing that happened there. But it's great music, and that's another ththing, is that Dave was a real humanitarian. He grew up humbly as a cowboy, making $1 a day, and so he never put on airs, and always had this touch with the common guy and the common struggles of everyone, no matter what race you were from.
Speaking with Chris Brubeck here on Jazz 90.1, what was it like having Louis Armstrong at your house? I mean, as a little kid, having friends like that come through.
Well, he came by a few times. It was like a cross between God and Santa Claus, as far as I was concerned. But, Dan and I grew up with, Paul Desmond.
Right.
Really our uncle. I mean, Paul was from Jewish origins, And yet that didn't stop him. When we still believed in Santa Claus, we'd be eating dinner and he'd be sneaking under the tree in a closed door, putting presents down there. And
He really was Uncle Paul.
yeah, he really was Uncle Paul. And Gene Wright and Joe Morello and Dan learned how to play, literally sitting on Joe Morello's lap. He's showing him at 4 years old how to hold the drumsticks. So we were very uniquely positioned to not only have that background, and those were just normal guys. It took a while till we realized that they were the guys that were winning all the downbeat pulls.
Right.
But we also grew up to be able to play with them on stage, like at Lincoln Center and all that kind of stuff. So it's been an amazing life, and we feel very blessed that we were born into this family to have those kinds of opportunities and that kind of environment.
Amazing. Speaking with Chris Brubeck here on Jazz 90.1 with a new album called Timeline. Chris, again, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you very much, and this is a great festival. Wow, I come here and I was like, wow, look at this roster. There's a lot of music going down, and I think, wow, that there's people in Rochester that support this. Means that they must be listening to a jazz station that's getting them all riled up and educated.
That's
and
the goal.
And ready to go.
There it is.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for stopping by. We look forward to checking out your show tonight, the Brubeck Brothers Quartet.